All right, we're going to get started. So, good afternoon and welcome. For those of you who are new to our show, I'm Andrea Sampson, the CEO of Talk Boutique, and your host and moderator of today's sense-making conversations. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're going to delve into relationships, mental health, and entrepreneurship, and how the three intersect. Relationships, well, we all know they can be challenging. And entrepreneurship, well, it is a roller coaster, that I can tell you. So when these two things come together, our mental health can be challenged. But even if you're not an entrepreneur, in this current COVID-19 pandemic, many of us are now working from home, and we're finding ourselves living, working, and interacting all from what was our refuge, our safe space. So what do we do when our most important relationships become strained? How do we manage through stress with coworkers in a distanced environment? And what about building businesses in the midst of this stress? Well, these are realities for so many of us. Our guest today is Cherry Rose Tan, a fifth-generation entrepreneur. She brings over a decade of experience in psychology and mental health. Cherry Rose has guided thousands of entrepreneurs and business leaders through the trenches of mental health, particularly on coaching emotional resilience. Known as the founder whisperer, she has a gift for drawing out the most intimate conversations from tech's elite. A founder herself, Cherry Rose runs a business called #RealTalk that focuses on creating a safe space for founders and entrepreneurs to talk about their most vulnerable challenges. Now, I've had the pleasure of knowing Cherry Rose for a number of years, and I know the challenges she herself has faced as both a founder and as a human. Cherry Rose, tell us a bit more about your story and how we can learn from your experience.
Thanks so much for that amazing intro. I'm so grateful just to be with all of you today to talk about mental health, relationships, and also just really navigating the areas between the personal and the professional. So as Andrea mentioned, the work that I do, it's in this sort of intersection, and particularly with #RealTalk, it's a mental health movement that works a lot with tech CEOs. And so being in that intersection, I really get the privilege every single day to be able to hold space for people and to kind of see what is happening between the personal and professional. So to kind of start off with, the theme of this talk is how to talk about the hard things. So I'm actually going to be setting a bit of context, and then also really excited for the interactive portion that's going to come in the next half of our time together. So to kind of start off with, what I want to share with you is a bit of context just about why we're having this conversation. So in the work that I do, I have the privilege to be able to see really intimate conversations and really intimate moments with a lot of business leaders. And these are people who face a lot of pressure at work, right? So pressure to perform, pressure to hold space or to lead other teams. But also at the same time, in this work, what I see is that, even though a lot of people in the workplace or in their industry are seeing their business side, so like, these are all their accomplishments, this is what they're doing with their team, these are all their launches. What's really interesting is that what I see in the work that we're doing is like, we're also seeing this human side and all the struggles that are coming up there. And so how do we navigate those hard things where, we're getting stresses in, let's say, our professional life, but then we're also having stresses coming up in our personal life. And so to share like a bit of context, right? So for some of the stuff that we've covered a lot of topics that for a really long time have been taboo, but are actually much more common than people think, especially when it comes to leaders and entrepreneurs. So we've covered topics like depression, anxiety, things like, for example, here, like trauma, and really allowing people to share their human sides. And so what I want to talk about is, first I want to talk about the current context with you. Like, where are we at right now with COVID-19 and how is this affecting us in terms of our families and maybe our workplaces? And then I want to talk about, also the line between personal and professional and how can we navigate those hard things? So to start off with, where I want to start is just talking about the context. So in a lot of business circles right now, and maybe you're seeing this in the media, there's these terms that are being coined, right? So right now we're experiencing something that's called the black swan, right? So it's a massive and unexpected event, right? So lots and lots of change coming. And despite, a lot of the preparation that especially maybe business leaders have had, despite all of that, when something like a black swan comes through, there's all this change. And oftentimes change also comes with a lot of loss. And so it's things like layoffs, things like maybe figuring out, okay, going from all this cash flow to no cash flow and having to pivot an entire business. And especially for leaders, and I'm sure there's people even right now who are navigating between, showing up as a leader in their workplace and also navigating being an awesome parent at the same time. And so the term that is going around right now in the business world is this idea of the new normal, right? So what will the new normal look like? Because it seems like with physical distancing, there's all kinds of new trends coming out. So things like virtual co-working, things like maybe certain industries like the events industry or the hotel industry or the travel industry may take several months even after physical distancing in order to normalize. And so, the first context or piece that I just want to share with each and every one of you is that, the fact of the matter is that when we experience something that leads to so much massive change, as a community, and even as individuals, what we're really experiencing is grief. And so to kind of share you something that is very current right now. So this article was, just at the end of March, and it's by Harvard Business Review. And they wrote this amazing article, and I highly recommend reading it. And what's really interesting is that, a lot of the emotions, uncomfortable emotions coming through, especially in the workplace, have to do with this idea of grief, which is that grief isn't just about the idea of maybe losing a loved one or losing somebody that maybe physically, but this concept of grief is really about uncomfortable emotions or very strong emotions that come up when we experience loss in our lives. And so this loss can look like maybe it's a job, or maybe it's a dream that you had with your business and now you can't launch it anymore. Or maybe it's even the loss of a relationship that you really treasured. And so what's really interesting, especially as we go into this conversation together today, about talking about the hard things, I want to let you know that, all of the emotions that we're experiencing with those hard things, a lot of these things have to do with grief or have to do with loss and change. And so, for example, in this chart here, so this is a chart actually from changingminds.org. And they wrote this amazing article that's about the sort of the extended cycles of grief, right? So actually breaking down the 5 stages of grief, which is a very, very popular model that's released by Kubler-Ross a long time ago. And actually taking that model and instead of just having the phases, breaking it down even deeper and actually going into the emotions. Like, what are the exact emotions that people feel at different stages? And so when we think about the hard things, it can be everything from, there's people out there right now, and I know I was one of those people, especially in the first few weeks, where some of us feel like we're frozen, right? Like feeling like it's overwhelming and it feels just really shocking, having maybe 70% of our lives changed or even 90% of our lives changed. There's maybe other people right now that might be dealing with anger of like, well, why is this happening now? Why me? And so every single person is at different stages of this continuum, and it's completely okay. And, you know, it's a conversation we're gonna be having more, especially as we kind of do the Q&A and whatnot. And so the question is that we get asked a lot is that, you know, how can we manage, right? So how can we manage that line between the personal and professional? So to talk about that line, where I want to go into is I kind of really want to be real and vulnerable with you. Just sharing with you not just the experiences of the community that I serve and a lot of the tech CEOs that I talk to, but also to talk to you about my personal story as well, that Andrea also sort of mentioned in terms of like mental health and just my personal journey. And so these quotes right now that I'm showing to you, these are real quotes that have come up in the last 4 weeks in my community, right? So a community of 200 tech CEOs. I've paraphrased the quotes and I've just changed some of the details just to protect confidentiality. But here are some of the things people are saying in sort of like in private settings. You know, things like hard moments, like I just laid off all 300 of my employees. You know, I'm feeling so much guilt. I feel like a terrible person. Like, I don't know how they'll feel their families. I have a lot of people who tell me things like, you know, I feel like a terrible parent right now. Like, I don't know how I'm going to manage my business and also manage my marriage and also manage and be able to help my children at the same time. More recently, in some of my close circles, I've even had friends of mine, so entrepreneurs who are running a business right now who've started losing really close ones, especially grandparents, to COVID. And so, you know, one of the things I really want to highlight, especially as I invite you to ask questions today, because it's really interactive, is that let's step into the invitation that there really isn't a line between the personal and the professional. That especially where we're at right now with COVID-19 is bringing up a lot of loss and a lot of uncomfortable emotions. And it's okay for us to be with that reality. It's okay for us to be with that acknowledgement that maybe our personal and professional lives are starting to meld together. And how can we be rigorous in not just our work and providing for our families, but also being rigorous when it comes to, you know, taking care of our mental health, especially in some of the stats that you see here with entrepreneurs. So what I want to go into to share a bit of context and to really create a safe space is, you know, I want to go first and actually share my personal experience with you, going through my own Black Swan event and also my experiences with mental health. So these pictures, well, the picture at the top actually here was many, many years ago. This is probably 7 or 8 years ago. And in the tech industry, 7 or 8 years ago, my brother and I, our family, we started a crypto company. And we were working in the space of financial inclusion and doing a lot of travel. And this picture that you see here, so this is actually my brother, who is the co-founder and COO of our crypto exchange and a lot of the work that we were doing in that space. And so you can imagine, so this is 7 or 8 years ago, and we were dealing with all kinds of stress. You know, people didn't understand what Bitcoin was. People just thought we were crazy. So we're dealing with all kinds of work stress. And about, you know, almost like 2.5 years ago now, I had my experience of a black swan, right? So we had all kinds of preparation. You know, as Andrea mentioned, I'm a 5th generation founder. Literally my great grandparents and every generation since has started companies. But despite all of the advantages that my brother and I came in with, it really did not prepare us or prepare my family for the Black Swan event that we had. So in late 2017, I had a series of, I mean, to not put it subtly, I mean, a series of basically very like traumatic events, very, very painful events that happened. And they all happened like one after the other. So like in late 2017, so this is back in September, I ended up in a very random and major car accident. So I was dealing with, you know, emotional trauma, you know, like couldn't even get into my car, like couldn't even like drive at the wheel because I was like dealing with that aftermath, and just dealing with the repercussions of that. And then 3 months after that, my brother, who is my only sibling, he, to be honest, like he just suddenly passed away on Christmas Day. And it was a very, very random event. There was no warning, and it really like shook our family to the core. And while we were in the midst of that grief, 10 days after his passing, my mom got diagnosed with stage 3C cancer. So then we had to start like focusing on, okay, like, can we get her treatment? Like, how long does she have? Like, what's her survival rate and all those things? And obviously, because my brother and I were running this company, and this company was, at the time back in 2017, like we had just closed a major deal. We were about to do a national launch. It was incredibly stressful to be a leader in tech and also to be with myself and realize that there was a lot of just really tough things that were going on with me personally. And so I share this with you because I've really been through that. I've been through a lot of the losses. I've been through a lot of the, if you want to call it the shock or the destabilization, like what that feels like when, you think you have everything prepared, you think you have everything ready, and then you kind of wake up one day and it's just like your whole world looks different. And I just want to share that because it's like, I see you and I hear you, and I want to create this safe space for you to ask the questions that you've been wondering about, since physical distancing. And so as we get into the next part of our conversation, this interactive Q&A, I just really want to let you know that, the reason today that we're gathered here to talk about, how to talk about the hard things, and you can kind of see our movement, our mental health movement is named after that theme, right? It's called #RealTalk for a reason. One of the things that I found that has been so empowering to me is realizing that even though I couldn't control the black swan, like I could never have anticipated like what had happened with my brother. I couldn't have anticipated, the accident, my mom's cancer. There were no warning signs for my mom's cancer either. The power that we do have is the power of communication and the power of conversation, and using that to propel us forward and to create new possibilities or new supports for ourselves, despite the black swan or despite the pain and the loss that we're going through. And so that's the invitation that I have for each of you today. So what I'm going to get into is I want to ask you right now, we're going to open up to this conversation, but it's like, I really want to know, what are you wondering about and how can I best serve you? And so let's open up this safe space for discussion.
Cherry Rose, yeah, thank you. Thank you. First of all, what an incredibly vulnerable share. Thank you. We've got a few people who have commented in the chat section, just reaching out to support you and to say, thank you for sharing that. It's incredibly powerful when we share our own challenges, because the reality is, as humans, we all live very full lives that have both incredible joy and deep sadness. And we talk a lot often about the joy and not so much about the sadness. And but yet sadness often is the piece where we can learn the most and where we can help each other the most. And so by you being as vulnerable as you have just been, I know you've helped many, because while your story is your own, we all have elements of that story in our lives. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So yeah. So as we move into sort of the Q&A, and I can see them coming up quickly, but I wanted to start off, because I think that there's a place where right now we are all struggling, and that's in the place of space. So right now, so many people are working from home. And if you happen to be like me and live in a downtown area, the likelihood is your space is not so large. And so we have these smaller spaces. We might have spouses, children in those spaces with us. And we've now invited coworkers into those spaces, because as we sit
Right.
on these Zoom calls, suddenly we've got more people in the house with us. And so how do we have those difficult conversations? Because the reality is, somebody left the toilet seat up doesn't stop happening just because COVID-19, is around. And that may not be the difficult conversation, but it is a catalyst often for one. And then similarly, I might have to have that difficult conversation actually with my coworker, which makes it even more challenging when my kids are sitting beside me. So tell me, how do we have those difficult conversations given the fact that we have very little space these days?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for asking that. I think what's so important, like you mentioned a bit about the physical space, and it's very interesting to be in such constraints right now. I'm a bit more of an how to describe it. I'm a very stubborn person. I test as a maverick in terms of personality type. So I'm the kind of person like, there isn't a way, I'm going to go find a way. And right now with constraints, one of the things that's interesting is like, how can we like innovate and create different solutions that still get us to the result that might not be using the resources that we initially had. And so, to address kind of the elephant in the room, right? Like in the past, if we had conflict, especially let's say if it was in the household, because right now there might be stuff happening with like maybe your son or daughter, there's stuff maybe happening with your partner, your spouse. In the past, like we would have been able to go out and maybe like do a hobby or have space and be able to cool off and then come back. And now we don't have that, the physical space at least. And so one of the things that I tell people right now is like, how can we actually create like mental or emotional space? And this is where the power of conversation comes in, right? So one of the things that's going to come up for people, and I've already been warning people in advance, especially for leaders, is like the deeper that we go into like the hard things, or the deeper that we go into pain or loss, the more of your, how do you describe it? The more of your leadership and also your weaknesses come up. And one of the biggest ones that I see, and this is especially for leaders, because I can relate, like I know I have to catch myself when I do this, is that a lot of leaders, like, I mean, if you're a leader, you're probably somebody who often defaults to giving. You're the caretaker, you're the person that people come to for advice. Maybe you're also navigating being a parent at the same time. And so when we're dealing with, being mentally and emotionally healthy, we have to make sure to create that mental and emotional space. So for example, one of the things that I do is I do a lot of so for example, speaking to my own personal life and how I use different mental health tools and communication tools. I have a lot of structures and systems and actually communication protocols, like actual communication processes with my partner, right? So for example, my partner, he works in tech. He works for a company right now that's kind of like on the rocket ship, and he works in data engineering. So we both literally work in the same industry, probably knowing a lot of the same people. And so it can be very easy for us to start spending our nights talking about work, to have that bleed into the weekend, to have stuff coming up for me about the work that I'm doing with tech CEOs, and then for it to affect him, right? So when we're navigating uncomfortable conversations, we have like a philosophy that's really around like nonviolent communication. And this is very, very important, not just from a personal standpoint, but also from the place of leadership, where and this is actually based on the book. So it's Nonviolent Communication is actually the name of the book. And it's by a man named Marshall B. Rosenberg. And he used to be one of the top sort of negotiators in the States. They would send him out to war zones, literally, where people, like the level of conflict was so high that it's like you're talking about life or death. And one of the things that he noticed when it came to like space, mental or emotional space, is a lot of conflict could actually be resolved if we created a safe space for people to talk about things, where it's actually not coming from a place of blame or guilt or judgment. Because once we add upset into our mental or emotional space, all of a sudden all of the understanding goes away, right? So if you, even though you know you love your partner, you know you love your son or your daughter, if we're starting to bring in those emotions and we don't catch that, it becomes hard for them to be able to share very honestly, and to also share in a way that's like, hey, actually, like, I don't want to be mad at you, but this is actually what I need. Like, it's hard for us to come from that peaceful place where we're actually doing that. And so it's important to have that practice around like telling people ahead of time, like, hey, like, in case we have conflict in the future. So you're not waiting for the conflict, but already anticipating ahead of time, like, hey, when uncomfortable emotions come up in the future, could we make an agreement together that we're going to use like nonviolent communication? And if we're angry, like, maybe we should step away and then we can come back later.
So I think you're touching on something that's so incredibly important. And I see that Natalie, who has chimed in asking about how to avoid conflict and how to get comfortable with having those hard conversations with people who are not performing on your team. And this idea of nonviolent communications and finding those triggers that actually get you to that place. So two things. One, help us to understand from Natalie's perspective what she can do, but help us to understand what you mean specifically by nonviolent communications. Because I think a lot of people won't really understand that concept.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification, by the way. So nonviolent communication is a term, and there's actually trainings about this. This is like a global, like, sort of like framework that a lot of facilitators use. And so Rosenberg, when he talks about nonviolent communication, so he actually studied language, like he literally did a study on language. And what he noticed in the way people communicate is that a lot of the language that we use is what he terms violent. And so what he means by it doesn't mean physical violence, but it means it's like the kind of language that actually hurts somebody and closes them up. So it's things like how to say, like dislike, being very critical, like, you did this wrong, I did this right. So when we go into those sort of phrases, it closes people off, and people often get defensive. And so, for example,
I just want to jump in there because I think I want to really highlight this. Like, it's accusatory language. And I think, I think even as you're saying this, you did this, it's your fault, and I want for all our listeners right now to think about that. Those words hurt. There's a violence to them. We can feel ourselves starting to close off when we're hearing those words. So I think it's really important that that we start to feel the words and not just hear the words. And I think that's maybe what you're trying to kind of bring us to, right? Is that feeling place versus the intellectual place.
100%. And actually it ties in so well with the philosophy with Rosenberg, because he ended up creating nonviolent communication as a framework, because what he realized, and actually Chris Voss, who is right now very well known, he's a New York Times bestselling author, and he was the top negotiator for the FBI. So he's got a book about negotiation as well. And in both of their works, right? So what they notice about communication is actually a lot of when it comes to effective communication and conflict resolution, it's kind of ironic, but most of it actually relies on the ability to listen. And what we don't realize is that it's, as Andrea says, it's not about the literal words sometimes. Like, sometimes, how to describe it? So Rosenberg talks about his theory around nonviolent communication, which is that the reason why we communicate is that every single person, even the person, right? Even if there's a person out there who's super angry at you, they're swearing, they're accusing you, all that stuff. Every single person on the planet who's choosing to communicate, they're communicating because in actuality, underneath that communication is a human need that they have, that they want to be met. And it might not even be something that's conscious to them. So, if there's people out there who are just sharing and sharing and sharing, maybe their need underneath is like, I just want to be seen and heard. Or that person who's asked, in the workplace, who's maybe like completely disoriented, and they keep coming up to you and asking questions and questions and questions, and maybe you're feeling like, why are they bothering me with these questions, and shouldn't they just go and like look at the company manual or something like that. Maybe that person, what they're asking underneath is like, hey, actually, I'm having a lot of anxiety right now, I don't really know what to do, can you mentor me? So there is a much deeper level of communication, almost like the iceberg. Like there's the level
Right.
of the words, and then underneath that iceberg that you don't see is all of the stuff that they're actually trying to say. And so, Natalie, because I know you're asking the question about conflict, that's one of the things that actually really shocks people. So like, I work in the tech industry. A lot of people, I mean, really frankly, a lot of people sue each other like all the time. That's the thing. Like, getting sued by competitors, people wanting to have conflict on IP and trademarks and stuff. So it's a lot of conflict. And one of the things that I found in terms of navigating really high emotion stuff is, tying into what I mentioned before, is like going into this place of listening. And so sometimes, and this definitely happened to me when I went through my Black Swan, at the beginning, especially just after like the loss of my brother, my hearing was all over the place. Like I don't even know if I could have clearly heard what other people were trying to convey to me, because I was just very distraught. Like I was dealing with like, okay, like what is my life going to be now as an only child? Like, am I going to have my mom? Like, is she going to be able to survive treatment? Like, I'm scared right now. I've never had a company without my brother. Like it was just, there was so much stuff going on in my head. And so in terms of conflict resolution, one of the practices that I do is actually, I do a lot of creating my own mental or emotional space where I just be with my emotions and actually like allow myself to like feel anger, and allow myself to feel sadness, allow myself to feel all the things that are upsetting, so that I can actually move through it. And once I move through it and I feel like, oh, you know what? I feel like I can kind of hear again. I feel like I've almost like unclogged my like emotional pipes. Then I'm like, okay, now I can go have the conversation with the
So
person that I'm having conflict with.
I want to unpack that a little bit. So I want to make sure that that our listeners are really getting this. So there's a couple of techniques that I just heard you say. So the first one is to take stock of yourself. Where are you? So before you go and have a difficult conversation, the first place you've got to start is with you. So how are you feeling? What is in your life? What's going on? And so in this world right now, it might be that, take a safe, socially distanced walk to calm yourself, or, do some deep breathing to bring yourself back to a place where you're calm. But then the second thing that you're going to want to do is to understand or get yourself to be in a place of compassion for that other person. So go to that place of what is it that they are actually needing? What is their need? So, the person you're going to have that difficult conversation with, what do you think it is that they need, that their behavior maybe is overshadowing? So if you try and go put yourself in their shoes for a couple of minutes, that can help you to get to that place of empathy and compassion. So before you have that difficult conversation, you're calm and you're already outside of what your needs are and into what their needs are. Then when you approach that conversation, the next thing would be to ask them to tell you how they're feeling. So you're doing the same thing with them that you did with yourself, is helping them to get outside of their own conflict. So that's a pretty layered thing, but it's an important one. So I just wanted to make sure that our audience heard that.
Yeah, and I really, really loved how you framed it too, because it's like sometimes I find, especially for business leaders, because I work a lot with them, a lot of people just kind of want to go from 0 to 100, not building the correct foundations. And even with hashtag real talk, like similar to layers, actually the 3 layers, like we talk about, hashtag real talk happens first at the level of self, like with yourself. Then hashtag real talk happens at the level of team. So team could be your immediate family or your executive team or whoever it is. And then at the highest level, it's like hashtag, or not highest level, but at the last level is hashtag real talk works at the level of community. So now you're in a place where like not only you're clear with yourself, you're clear with your team, but now you and your team can now be of service to other people. And it's very important because, and I'm sure this, especially if you start listening to what's happening in your head and what you're saying yourself and how you speak to other people, if you start listening to that, you actually realize that you can see your leadership in your communication. And so if you're not grounded and you're not in a place where it's like you're in power and you're coming from a place where you've been complete with maybe some of the pain and things, it starts to show up in communication. And it starts to affect also as well, like the possibilities and the options that other people also have with you. Because maybe, for example, somebody wanted to do something with you, or let's say a spouse wanted to have a conversation with you about, let's say, actually they're struggling with anxiety, or they're struggling with self-worth because they just lost their job. And that's how they used to relate to their self-worth. And now they don't want to have that option. They don't have that option with you because maybe they don't feel safe. So it's important that the layers happen at those stages too, and not to just go skip and like, let me go at the level of like community and like just go all the way to 100 and go do it. Like if you do it step by step, that's where the real, the most power comes from.
Right. So it's me with me, me with you, and me with us. Right.
Yes,
So it's
exactly.
sort of, and so we can remember that. I think that's so powerful. You talked about, a little bit about, some of the challenges that you had and what you term your black swan. And I think, because I've known you for some time, and I know we've had several conversations on this, and I know one of the contributing factors to what happened with your brother, especially, was work-life balance. And, this is a challenge that so many of us, especially as entrepreneurs, and today for so many employees, even because we're working from home, and suddenly work-life balance is a thing that is really difficult to navigate because, well, I'm working all the time because I'm at home. And so where is my balance? And so what's the difference? And I've heard you use this term, and I think that there's a really interesting way of looking at it, which is work-life balance versus work-life integration. And is there such a thing as work-life balance? And what do you mean by work-life integration? So I'm going to leave that with you. Help us to understand that.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So this is my stance on it based on the work I've done. I truly believe in this, where we are right now as a society, that there's actually no such thing as work-life balance. Like I actually think that's a completely old paradigm. Like especially for working in tech, but now like what I'm even saying doesn't only apply to tech, because basically almost every company now is a tech company. If you're doing digital stuff, if you're doing Zoom, using Slack to connect with your company, the separation between what would have been our personal life and our professional life, it's almost like there's not really demarcation anymore. Like it's almost gone. It's like, people have their work apps on their phone, right? Or people can check their emails, or, people are doing those kind of things. And especially with something like what's happening right now with COVID, it's very, very important for us to know that, because this is a long game, right? Like we're talking about the new normal. Even coming out of this, to be honest, I don't really think that we're going to be returning to the way things used to be. For example, I have friends who even work in real estate, who work in corporate office space, people who run tech accelerators. There's even conversation now that a lot of companies might not even want to rent office space, right? So people might not even want to have an office anymore. What is that going to look like? Like officeless companies, right? So these are realities right now. And so, just when it comes to navigating like work-life balance, instead of calling it that, like let's just be with the reality, which is like it's work-life integration, right? The personal and the professional are both there. And especially if you're in a place of leadership or you've got a big dream, even more your personal and your professional are going to be so close together, especially for the entrepreneurs who are here. You guys know, right? Like entrepreneurship is like I call it's an all-in sport. Like you can't just be like, you're not really halfway in, and there's a lot of stuff that comes up for you in your leadership. So to be okay with that. And so that's why I mentioned even the example that I did with my partner, because that was part of the acknowledgement in our work. It's like we both work I work with high performing tech CEOs. He works for one of the top tech companies in the world. And so it's like, we're just navigating that flow, right? We're going one flow after the other and not saying, hey, well, that doesn't exist, so we're going to deny the problem. So that's really
Right.
important for workability, to
You
like
know,
be with that.
I'm going to take
Yeah.
that too, and because I want to make sure that I'm getting this correctly. And so if I go to the place of really being very tactical on this, so, if I think about my calendar and the way in which I manage my time, and I know I speak for many of us who we are a slave to that calendar. If it's not in that calendar, it's not happening. And so the thing that I think I'm learning, and have to keep reteaching myself, because I certainly fall out of this habit, but you have to put into your calendar the things that are important to you, not just from a work perspective, but from a personal perspective. So, you know what? Maybe Tuesdays at 10, you play tennis with a friend. Maybe that's your thing. Put it in your calendar, because if it's not there, it's not going to happen. And you're not going to take, and your physical body is as important as your mental body that you bring to work every day, that intellectual side of you. But if your physical is not kept up at the same level, you're not going to be, you're not going to be able to play that sport, that entrepreneurial sport, because the reality is we're all corporate athletes here of some sort, or we're entrepreneurial athletes. And so what are you doing to take care of your mind, to take care of your body, to take care of your spirit, to take care of your soul? These are all parts of ourselves. And so if you live and die by that calendar, maybe some of that stuff should be in that calendar. And so you're taking care of you. So do I have that right? Am I sort of getting that?
Yeah, I actually love that you mentioned it, because it's that I feel like it's the action item to like what I was talking about as a concept. And I mean, to even share a very concrete example, um, I actually do use my calendar. I actually do schedule like self-care and things like that. And one of the things that I even did was like realizing, wow, I'm always giving all the time as a leader because I'm holding mental health space. And oftentimes if people are coming to me, not a lot of the time, it's not happy things that people want to share with me about, because people need a safe space to talk about something that they're the hard things, right? So I literally what I do now is I actually, well, the section, well, this is a talk, but I mean, like for example, with meetings, I don't take any meetings before 3 p.m. And I do that specifically because I actually need containers for deep work with my team. I need containers where, for example, I'm in a community where we have a virtual co-working space and I trust the person who's facilitating it. And I used to facilitate co-working that tried to include me. And then I realized like, I actually just need somebody to hold space for me so that I can start off every morning feeling grounded, feeling calm, feeling okay. And then even at night, for example, and I really am not joking about this. I take it very seriously in my calendar. Like for example, like I play video games like at night, and I do that on purpose so that I disconnect from my work, and I'm not always just thinking about mental health and all of these things. And so that's kind of the joy that I have with my partner, and we share like a virtual farm and take care of our plants. So
Oh, I
like
think
that
you
kind
need
of
to meet
stuff.
my daughter. She's got one of those too. So she keeps trying to
Nice.
get me to come and plant some plants on her farm, but I keep saying no, but maybe I'll try it. Maybe I'll try it. Cherry Rose, we're almost out of time. I just want to say thank you so very much. I am so incredibly grateful to know you, to be able to have this conversation with you, and for you to share all of your brilliance with our community. Thank you so very much. And I want to say thank you to everybody who has joined us here today. This was a special edition of Sense Making Conversations with Cherry Rose. And so we are on again tomorrow at 12:30. And we have a real treat because we're bringing Melanie Sodka back. Many of you will remember Melanie from our Changemaker 20 a couple of weeks ago. And we had so many people reach out to us and ask for more. So Melanie's coming back in the longer segment of the Sense Making Conversation. And she's going to show us how to use her unique capacity creator framework to help you self-identify and state your state of capacity, where you are now and where you maybe want to be. So this is a great way for you to pick up on what Cherry Rose has just shared with us, which is really looking at your mental health and saying, what's happening with me right now that maybe I need to pay some attention to? And if we look at where our level of capacity is, it might help you to shift out of some of that. So thank you very much for your time, for your attention, and thank you for being part of our community. And stay safe, stay connected, and stay healthy. We look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow with Melanie Sodka. And again, thank you to our guest, Cherry Rose Tan. I'm Andrea Sampson, your host of Sense Making Conversations.